Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I rise today grateful to Almighty God as we begin the Lenten season to contribute to this debate this afternoon, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I continue to be grateful that I live in the greatest country in the world, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. I'm grateful for those who have come before me in this place and whose legacy we all, myself and everybody in here, continue to stand on, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Because, Mr. Deputy Speaker, despite our differences, despite our political differences, we are one country, and though we have different views of how we continue to facilitate the further greatness of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, there is no doubt that we all love this country, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And oftentimes, politics is a battle of ideas, not necessarily questioning a person's patriotism, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Because, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the truth is we don't talk about it often, not necessarily on camera, but the truth is that we are all connected some way, somehow, whether through family or otherwise in different relationships in our various circles. And the truth is that I have some friends, I have a number of friends on the other side, they've just signed on to some bad policies, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Signed on some bad policies, Mr. Deputy Speaker. That's why, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I don't attack people, I attack ideas. I don't attack people, I attack ideas, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank the good people for us in Barnabas.
Facts.
It continues to be an honor to represent them and represent their interests, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this debate today, as is always the case with these kinds of debates, dives into a myriad of different issues that affect the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, be it on the economy, national security, immigration, healthcare, education, and the list goes on. But as I get into the substantive part of this, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I wish to address a few things, Mr. Deputy Speaker. One of the other things that we talk about in terms of the impact of our decisions and the policies of the government is, of course, government efficiency, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to read for this Parliament, and I know the member for Angliston, though she is the Minister for Education, that the University of the Bahamas does not fall directly under remit, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But the Student Government Association, Mr. Deputy Speaker, put out a memorandum, Financial Status of the University and its Impact on Students, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And it says here that it has become evident that the University of the Bahamas is once again facing significant financial constraints that directly affects its students. As your Student Government Association, we believe it is our duty to seek clarity and transparency regarding these challenges and their implications for our student body. They go on to talk about, underneath the government tertiary grant program, the government of the Bahamas has borne the responsibility of subsidizing tuition and student aid at the University of the Bahamas, including accommodations, grant, and the nursing and teacher stipends. These financial supports are not merely privileges, but essential provisions that enable students to successfully pursue their education. However, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it goes on, the fall of 2024 semester was marred by substantial delays in the disbursement of these critical funds. Students, specifically of nursing and teaching majors, found themselves unable to purchase necessary supplies and afford essential academic resources. Some Family Island and international students who rely heavily on off-campus housing faced the threat of eviction, some of whom were ultimately displaced due to the lack of timely financial support. I'm going to ask certain questions of the government Has the government failed to uphold its financial obligations to the university, thereby placing thousands of students in dire financial straits? Has the government allocated the funds needed to support the tertiary grant to other ministries in light of recent allegations surrounding travel expenses? What priority does the government place on higher education and the advancement of Bahamian youth, especially when significant national expenditures suggest a misalignment of priorities? And lastly, how does this ongoing financial concern align with the vision set forth by Shenandon Oscar Pinling in 1974, who envisioned the University of the Bahamas as the primary institution to foster national development and intellectual growth? More specifically, how do these concerns assist the university in its efforts to seek national and international accreditation? We urge the government to provide transparency regarding its commitment to education and to ensure that the necessary financial support is made available without further delay. The success of our students and, by extension, the future of our nation depends on it. Mr. Deputy Speaker. Memorandum.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Angliston.
Just a couple things that I want to say. These students are nursing students and education or teacher students. And there's an arrangement where subventions are made for housing and for a stipend. I've been advised by the University of the Bahamas that there are 225 students receiving accommodations grant, 72 nursing, and this includes only those approved by the Ministry of Health, and 88 in education. All students were told last week that payments would be made by Friday of this week, so the payments are underway. But I noted that on social media, the same grouping, the University of the Bahamas Student Government Association, when it became sort of political in its nature, they pointed out that the student government, the University of the Bahamas Student Government Association, did not make direct blame to any specific government or political party, as it was indicated in our initial statement that this matter has occurred for quite some time across varying governments. And then they asked that prior, that you contact them before making statements. I think the point raised is that we have to find a way to ensure that students are not put in this position and to create a more efficient way of making the payments. And I think that is the lesson that comes out of this, because as they have pointed out, not me, this is under your watch, this has been a problem. And so let's just work together to see how we can alleviate this circumstance with the students there. I just want to say for the record, they've asked, they're saying that this is ongoing, and they just like to see it addressed, and I agree with them on that.
Thank you, honourable member.
Thank you, member for Angliston. And I would just add, I don't doubt that the association is attempting to get in any type of political back and forth. So indeed, their issues are legitimate and substantive, and speaks to the issue of their educational development. And I hope, as we all do, that the government would arrest this issue, because clearly it's causing a problem for a number of the students. Mr. Deputy, it has been brought to our attention, Mr. Deputy, that over the last 2 weeks, Mr. Deputy, the Public Service has sent thousands of files back to various ministries, Mr. Deputy, thousands of files that could not be processed by this new computer system, Mr. Deputy.
Mr. Deputy, I haven't even... Fine. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Golden Gates.
But you don't have to finish. Mr. Deputy, I would like the member for St. Barnabas to withdraw that statement, because that is absolutely false. Not one file from the Ministry of Public Service has been returned to any ministry in the public service. So you can withdraw that statement, because that is absolutely false. Up to 8 p.m. last night, no files have left our ministry, and none will be leaving the ministry. None will be leaving the ministry. So that is false.
Thank you, honorable member.
I thank the member. Is there an issue with the new system, this new system? Is there an issue with the processing as it relates to this new system?
Honorable member, before we go any further, are you going to withdraw? Is it?
Is there an issue with the new system? Mr. Deputy, can she answer? Can you answer the question?
Honorable member, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Golden Gates.
Because it's false. That's why. That's for what. There is no issue with the system. You want me to answer your question?
Members.
Okay. Through the speaker. Mr. Deputy, there's no issue with the system. We are processing a workflow at this time, and staff of the public service and other technical officers are being trained. No files have left the ministry.
Thank you, honorable member. Honorable member for St. Barnabas, are you going to withdraw?
This known over there. We are processing. Y'all are walking around files you can't put into the Oracle system.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy,
are you telling the truth? There's no problem with the system.
Mr. Deputy, I thank the honourable member for Golden Gates. I thank the honourable member for Golden Gates for that clarity, Madam Mr. Deputy, and I withdraw that statement, Mr. Deputy.
Thank you, honourable member.
I have no issues with that. If the member says that has not happened, no files were sent, anywhere. Okay, the Prime Minister didn't need to intervene. The Prime Minister didn't intervene with this issue with files being sent back to the ministries or anything.
They're not answering the question. They're not answering the question.
Okay. All right. Mr. Deputy.
Y'all got caught with the ink on your face.
Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy. The issue of, and the member for Marco City has been leading the charge on this, Mr. Deputy, as it relates to the importance of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas really trying to find a way, Mr. Deputy, to increase our stopover visitors, Mr. Deputy. And we see this morning it talks about visitor departures down by 4.6%, Mr. Deputy. And as we get excited, as we should when anybody comes to our shores and our country, about the increase in cruise passengers, Mr. Deputy, there are some signs, Mr. Deputy, there are some signs that we should not be overly concerned about, but something that we need to keep on keep in our peripheral, if you will, Mr. Deputy, because the truth is, Mr. Deputy, if in fact cruise ship passengers go on the increase, but there continues to be any decline with stopover visitors, Mr. Deputy, it will begin to negate itself in terms of the economic impact, simply because the stopover visitor spends 3,000% more than the cruise ship passenger. $85, Mr. Deputy, versus $2,700, Mr. Deputy. So that's something, Mr. Deputy, that we need to focus on, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, most recently, Mr. Deputy, led by the leader of the opposition, we visited BDOCS, Mr. Deputy, the Bahamas Department of Correctional Services. Was the member for Marco City, myself, Senator Darren Henfield, and Senator Maxine Seymour, and we were shown around, if you will, tour the facilities by the commissioner and his team, and we are very grateful for the opportunity to do so. I will say, Mr. Deputy, in many different ways, that visit shook my humanity, Mr. Deputy. And while we can concede that conditions and a new prison may be needed, we don't know if it needs to be 100 million or 90 million that the government has said, there is no doubt, Mr. Deputy, that things have to change, Mr. Deputy. One of the things in particular, Mr. Deputy, is we would encourage the commissioner and his team to revisit his team, to revisit the visiting policies there at BDOCS. From COVID, the inmates there, persons housed there, have not been able to physically, BDOCS, physically see their family member. I don't know if there's a reason why that policy is still in place. We get why that was put in place, but why it's not been reversed at this time. Okay, so that's the government's position now. That what is the government's position? You're saying that no penitentiary does it, but there was a policy there before that was only changed because of COVID. So that's the government policy now that persons who are housed at BDOCS will not be able to see their family member. No, but can you stand and say that? I mean, you're saying it from your seat.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Freetown.
Government's policy, Ms. Deputy Speaker, is to take advice from correctional experts and to act on that advice.
Thank you, honourable member.
Well, Mr. Deputy, let me just put on the record, the opposition firmly believes that the policy needs to be reversed, Mr. Deputy, and so that persons housed at BDOCS, Mr. Deputy, are able to have contact with their family members, as was the case prior to COVID. And so we encourage the government, notwithstanding what was said by the member for Freetown, we encourage the government to really take a look at that, Mr. Deputy. That you talk about, Mr. Deputy, about trying to change the culture of BDOCS, Mr. Deputy, and trying to ensure that these persons, once they leave BDOCS, that they are mentally, physically, and in other ways prepared to come back. And there's no doubt the ability to have contact with your family members has to be one of those things in place that allows you to come back into society, Mr. Deputy.
You could comment on that. I mean,
Mr. Deputy, I turn to this.
Member, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Freetown.
I know that having approved the visit to the facility, I had hoped that they would have gotten the full tour and brief. BDOCS, one of its rehabilitative program, is a program that we adopt that is run in the Republic of Cuba, which is Grow Your Child, where inmates, females, and from the male prison, the correctional facility admits their families there for them to spend quality time with their children outside of the across a little table time that is being mentioned as the pass. And the program is called Grow Your Child. And it is something that is recommended by correctional facilities, and it's run in Cuba. It has great success in Cuba, and they're implementing it at BDOCS and have implemented it at BDOCS.
No, well, that's we were there for 3 hours. Yeah, we were there at least 3 hours and had a very substantive conversation with the team. Very productive, must say, and we are grateful to the commissioner and his team for that. But that isn't something that's not something that we heard. But again, Mr. Deputy, just wanted to state our position. On the record, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, this government, Mr. Deputy, as I turn to the debate at hand, Mr. Deputy, has gone through great lengths, Mr. Deputy, to try to convince the Bahamian people that they have done a yeoman's job in turning the country around, that they have done an invaluable job in changing the lives of the Bahamian people in a positive way, Mr. Deputy. And Mr. Deputy, as we have this discussion about the midterm budget statement and the numbers mean something in the lives of the Bahamian people, Mr. Deputy. So the government boasts about its record-breaking revenue, Mr. Deputy, but the truth is that has been on the backs of the Bahamian people in terms of taxes and increased fees in government services, Mr. Deputy. The government, Mr. Deputy, promised They promised, Mr. Deputy, 287 million surplus, Mr. Deputy, but now that is turned in, Mr. Deputy, to a $400 million deficit, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, remember they told the Bahamian people, Mr. Deputy, that the choices that they make, the choices that you make, and how you spend your money is what is driving the high cost of living, Mr. Deputy. They told the Bahamian people that it is their fault, Mr. Deputy. But the government has made the choice to not rein in spending, Mr. Deputy. And Mr. Deputy, I challenge, Mr. Deputy, any members opposite or behind, Mr. Deputy, who have co-signed on to that position to stand up and say that they disagree, that it's not the Bahamian people's fault about the inflationary experiences that they are experiencing is not based on their choices, Mr. Deputy.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Freetown.
St. Barnabas puts out what is in fact a false challenge. Inflation happens because prices increase. Prices increase for any number of reasons, and most of them unrelated to domestic matters in the Bahamas. And so nobody would say that anything any Bahamian does drives inflation. If he's referring to the aspect that one must manage one's resources, that is something that my grandmother told me. And I have high regard for my grandmother. And she tended to steer me in the correct way. But nobody on this side has said that the Bahamian people are responsible for price increases to inflation. In fact, the member for Cat Island, Rumkins, and Salvador says it's unfair that we have very little to do with the factors that drive inflation.
Thank you, honourable member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, the government spending is outrunning its revenue, and it has the potential, Mr. Deputy, to have burdensome implications for the average Bahamian, despite improvements to wages, if the government fails to rein in spending or find other revenue sources. And the burden may eventually fall on the Bahamian people in the form, Mr. Deputy, of higher taxes, reduced public services, and increased borrowing costs, Mr. Deputy. The truth is, Mr. Deputy, as the government again brags about the revenue, Mr. Deputy, this is not revenue, Mr. Deputy, that came about because of some innovative policy, because of great strategic planning, Mr. Deputy. Again, this has happened at the disadvantage of Bahamian taxpayers, Mr. Deputy, who have had to shoulder a heavy tax burden ever since this government has come in office, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, this government has come in, Mr. Deputy, and the Bahamian people have not forgotten. This government, they took advantage of a Bahamian public who were understandably tired from a global pandemic and a government that was not perfect, neither was its prime minister, Mr. Deputy. But the truth is, it's the Bahamian people that decide, and we accepted that decision, Mr. Deputy. The Bahamian people, and he would be the first to tell you that, Mr. Deputy. The Bahamian people decided we would be in opposition and they would be the government, that they would get a chance to fulfill their promises and bring solutions they say they could bring, Mr. Deputy. The standard for accountability, Mr. Deputy, and assessing any government is not if you better than the other fellow. It's simply, have you lived up to what you promised the people you would do? No, they haven't. And they have not done that, Mr. Deputy. They point fingers, they bring up old grievances, Mr. Deputy, and they have failed on many of the promises that they have brought to the Bahamian people in 2021, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, there's a song out there called Just My Imagination, Running Away With Me. Mr. Deputy, the government's imagination is running away with them, Mr. Deputy, because of what they have in their mind they continue to do and have done for the Bahamian people. But the Bahamian people are living a different version, a far more burdensome version, a version where they are struggling, Mr. Deputy. But the government seems not, Mr. Deputy, to see that, or that they are in denial, Mr. Deputy. But they came in and they promised, Mr. Deputy, and they didn't deliver, but they've traveled, Mr. Deputy. They increased taxes on food and medications by 100%. They increased taxes on food, on medications by 100%. They increased taxes on food and medications by 100%, but they traveled. Now they want to take credit, Mr. Deputy, for taking a little bit off after increasing the taxes, Mr. Deputy. By not conducting the hedge, light bills went up by 163%. And they traveled. And now they want to take credit for taking off just a little bit. The government give it, and the government take it away, Mr. Deputy.
It's not blessed.
As Bahamians struggled these last 4 years, Mr. Deputy, they traveled. There's a cost of living crisis that they aided with their policies, Mr. Deputy, and by the government's own acknowledgement, Mr. Deputy, they had little success on helping to mitigate the impact of inflation. There's a cost of living crisis that they aided, but they traveled. They taxed the people like crazy, and they traveled. They said it was the choices that the Bahamian people are making that is making life hard. It's your fault, but they traveled. They acknowledged that they failed in their efforts to ease the inflationary burdens on the Bahamian people, and they traveled. As unions and Bahamian workers talk about agreements not being honored by the government, with their 14 strike certificates, they traveled. They increased the fees at road traffic, then they traveled. Their decisions led to skyrocketing light bills, and they traveled. They increased fees for Bahamians to leave their own country, and they traveled, Mr. Deputy Speaker. They didn't manage the payment for the police insurance, but they traveled. Eleuthera has almost been in consistent darkness and without water by any modern-day standard, Mr. Deputy, for most of their time in office.
That's right.
And they traveled.
Yes.
The story goes on, Mr. Deputy. They promised a new day, Mr. Deputy. Promised a new day. Mr. Deputy, the Golden Yoke Program, Mr. Deputy. The Golden Yoke Program was promoted. $15 million of taxpayers' money to reduce our reliance on the importation of eggs. 38 facilities on family islands that would produce 13 million eggs. Overall, it would go from 750,000 to 27 million eggs, Mr. Deputy. But it is nowhere to be found, Mr. Deputy. But they traveled. Speaking about travel, Mr. Deputy, 41 months of this administration, it has been 41 months of this administration, and they spent $58 million in 41 months. That is $1.4 million a month on travel. 41 months, $58 million. That's $1.4 million a month on travel. So let's put this baby to sleep right now, Mr. Deputy. Despite their desperate claim that they have spent more than the Minister administration, the Minister administration spent $38.6 million the whole term. In fact, in 1 year, $10 million was spent, and they've spent $10 million in 6 months. Mr. Deputy, 41 months, $1.4 million a month. That's what it works out to. And the Bahamian people see, Mr. Deputy, the Bahamian people see the move, where you allocate funds for travel, and before the ink dries on the budget, it's moved for travel, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, on climate justice, Mr. Deputy, we are supposed to be championing global climate justice and preserving our environment, Mr. Deputy. So much so, as was said by the member for East Grand Bahama, we spent $1.1 million was spent to go to COP29. $1.1 million. $1.1 million, Mr. Deputy. And it is of note, Mr. Deputy, that the Minister of the Environment has not been seen on any of these trips.
Is that true?
Marginalize him.
That's true, right?
Good man, and they marginalize.
Mr. Deputy, on both the SpaceX program and the moorings deal, Mr. Deputy, the EIA, Mr. Deputy, has been MIA.
Yes.
The EIA has been MIA, missing in action.
Nowhere to be
Where is the same sense of urgency, Mr. Deputy, nationally,
marginalized.
that we take with us on the global stage?
Nowhere to be found.
Mr. Deputy, on the moorings deal, Mr. Deputy,
Check that ball.
and I wish the member for Exuma was here, but he will have to address this when he returns, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, the member for Exuma seems to be having a row with the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Investments.
Investments. Investments.
Yes. He's having a row with himself, it seems, Mr. Deputy. Saw in the papers the other day, what do you call it, Shaggy? He said, it wasn't me. Said it wasn't me. And then, Mr. Deputy, he says, check the office of the Prime Minister. That's what the member says, check the office of the Prime Minister. He was a member of Cabinet, Mr. Deputy, as he saw what Cabinet approved. And now he wants to run from it, Mr. Deputy. It does not work that way. Mr. Deputy, the Bahamian people, and I will say this, Mr. Deputy, there is a conversation to be had. There is a conversation to be had, Mr. Deputy, about the whole issues of moorings and so forth. And the Prime Minister talked about it, right? And how it's needed. The problem is, Mr. Deputy, and how this arose, the Bahamian people didn't like it. Not 4 acres, Mr. Deputy. Not 40 acres, Mr. Deputy. Not 400 acres, Mr. Deputy. 4,000 acres of seabed, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, the member for Carmichael, is a good man. He likes to put his mother on me, but that's okay. She's good friends with my mother. The member for Carmichael, who some years ago, before politics, I think he won one of those mooting contests. That's what they call it, right? Yeah, mooting contests. So I was always impressed with the member for Carmichael, right? Mooting, yes, very impressed. Because even though sometimes I disagree with him, I sit back here in this place and I say, boy, that's a good argument he's making. I don't agree, but I like how the member do that. But on one issue, Mr. Deputy, I couldn't disagree with him more, and obviously the government couldn't disagree with him more, was when the member said the port deal was the worst deal ever.
Oh my God.
The worst deal ever, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, as the Bahamian people got a sniff of the moorings deal, they said that this gotta be the worst deal ever, Mr. Deputy.
That's the old line. No one knew who signed. That's the old line.
Michael, I behoove you
Mr. Deputy,
No one knew who signed.
Mr. Deputy,
No one knew who signed. That's your old line.
Mr. Deputy,
That's your old line now.
Mr. Deputy,
No one knew who signed.
as it relates, Mr. Deputy, to small business development, Mr. Deputy,
I can ask you.
that we all know that you don't have to be an economist to appreciate that the small businesses of our country is the engine that drives our economy, Mr. Deputy. They are still waiting for the $50 million a year support that this government, Mr. Deputy, promised that would be allocated, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, I engaged the member for Garden Hills, the Minister for Youth, Sports and Culture, and I thank him for his response, Mr. Deputy, about the Goodwill Games, Mr. Deputy, and he did say that the government did not make a commitment to hosting the Goodwill Games. This year, yes, this year. What is mind-boggling to those athletes is that our understanding is to put on the Goodwill Games costs $500,000, Mr. Deputy. And particularly our aquatics team, I mean, they've been carrying on bad for the last, 15 years. I mean, Why wouldn't we want to host? Why wouldn't we want to host the Goodwill Games, Mr. Deputy? $500,000, Mr. Deputy. $500,000, Mr. Deputy. Couldn't the government have found that from someplace? For the same reasons that the honorable member for Garden Hills talked about our commitment to putting on these sporting events and sports tourism and what it does for our country, but most importantly, what it does for our people, Mr. Deputy. $500,000, Mr. Deputy. But yet, they travel, Mr. Deputy. $500,000, but yet they travel. Mr. Deputy, I could remember as I prepare to wrap up, Mr. Deputy, I remember, Mr. Deputy, when they were here in opposition, and it was only 4 of them. And I always remember, in her infinite wisdom and her experience, the member for Angliston said to us, yeah, all that talking and all that bombing on the table you all doing, I know how this thing is go.
That's where we learned that.
Y'all gonna be over here soon. That's what she said.
Yeah.
And we laughed. We laughed. We laughed when she said it.
And I look where we is.
And boy, Mr. Deputy, I can say today, Mr. Deputy,
That's where we learned that from.
to embrace the members' words, it ain't long now,
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Deputy. It ain't long now. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy.